All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or maybe good evening, depending where you are. Welcome to the August Amazon DocumentDB Insider Hour Twitch show. And I'm Douglas Bonser, a senior DocumentDB specialist solution architect based out of the Dallas, Texas area. And with me today, we have Vin Yu talking about not one, not two, not three, but four new Amazon DocumentDB feature releases. So thanks for coming on the show, Vin. And I'll hand it over to you and just dive right into the discussion here.
Yeah. Thank you, Doug, for having me on the show. Really enjoy being here and sharing all the goodness with you all. We can start with our first feature. I just want to make sure really quick. Yeah, I see my screen up on the page, but I'm going to start with the first one. And the first release I'd like to share with you all is dynamic resizing for storage space. So one of those things where you kind of don't think about it, but it's in the back of your mind with a managed service, especially a database managed service. One of the things that we do is we provision your data for you in advance. So you don't have to be, buying storage, setting it up. It's one of those benefits of using a cloud or managed service. Now, what we did was in the past dynamically resized your storage space up to 64 terabytes, right? Mm-hmm. So we're not in the single digit terabyte range, but up to 64, and we're soon going to be hopefully expanding this in the future even more to meet our customers' needs. But before, we used to expand, and when you deleted data, we reuse that storage space for future workloads. But now what we've also added is additional optimizations to decrease that data as well, so you could save on cost.
Oh, nice.
So this is going to be available on all regions with only DocumentDB version 4.0 clusters. So if you go to our documentation, let me just expand this a little bit. There is a note on how, to read a little bit more about how your data storage is built. That we do have a section in and this is our what's new post that talks all about it. So that's our first feature.
Okay.
Slight optimization on your slide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm not sure if it was just on my side or your side, but it was a little glitchy there. So I think we missed the last sentence or two of what you were talking about there, Vin, or we may have. So,
just to repeat, just in case we had a blip on Twitch. We do have our developer guide and a what's new post. So if you go on your favorite search engine and search Amazon DocumentDB enables dynamic resizing for storage space, hopefully you'll find it. Hopefully that search engine, whichever one you're using, has indexed this page. You'll be able to find it. And then it links to our developer documentation where you can learn more.
Great. Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. So that's our first feature. Should we dive into the second one, Doug?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. The second feature I'd like to share with you all is the support for fast database cloning. And this is one that's I actually personally, of the four, I might be a little bit biased here. I might be a little favored. This is probably my favorite feature of the four, if I were to choose a favorite. In a nutshell, what this really enables you to do is create a clone of your cluster really quickly. And this is much faster than, and I'll explain to you how this works in a little bit, but effectively, regardless of the size of your data, we'll have you'll be able to clone your cluster in pretty much flat time. So whether you have 10 gigabytes of data or 32 terabytes of data, you're going to be able to use this. The time it takes to clone database is pretty much the same.
Right. I've played with it a little bit myself. I know I haven't tried like 30 terabytes, but I've got like a 15 terabyte data set. Yeah, and it is really cool. Within about 8 minutes or so, I've got that cluster up and available to clone to that cluster. Really pretty cool.
So let me go into our documentation really quick on cloning an Amazon DocumentDB cluster. So if you go to our developer documentation, again, everything I'm showing you here today is fully accessible to you. So there's no, I know that sometimes I come on the show with slides, and folks ask me for the slides, right? That content, but everything I'm showing you today here is in our documentation with pictures and all, so you can learn a little bit more. But before I go into like how this works a little bit, I'd like to just show, 3 examples here of why you might want to use this feature. So with the clone of your database, one common thing that I see a lot of our customers come to us is really just this last point here, where you can create a copy of your production cluster for development, testing, and other purposes. So a lot of times you want to take a copy of your production database, sanitize some of that data if it's potentially has privacy risks, and then use that data to do further development, whether you are adding a new field, adding a new index, or you want to test some other parameters or configurations. I would say this is the tool to go do that, because you get a copy of your data. You could do some additional testing on it that really reflects your production database.
And that's been a challenge certainly in customers I talk to. They want to do some testing, and it's without this, right? It's a non-trivial effort to create another cluster, maybe replicate all of that data over there to be able to test with it. So yeah, this really saves them a lot of time and effort.
Yeah. So I touched on the first point here, going back to the list about experimenting with potential changes. Another really common thing you could do with cloning is running workload intensive operations where you don't want impact to your production environment. For example, you want to export additional data to other means, for example, to a data lake potentially, or you want to run analytical queries on the clone. Now, you could do this by targeting a read-only replica in DocumentDB inside the same cluster. Another way you could do it is creating a clone if you want to export it into another environment, right? So that you don't accidentally touch anything in production or have access to production at all. So I think that there are some really cool use cases here on why you might want to clone a database. Now, just to explain a little bit about how we actually are able to create a clone of your database, regardless of the size, we actually use a copy on write protocol. And let me go into what that looks like in a bit. So imagine you have your original cluster A, and now you have a new cluster B. The moment you create a cluster B, in this case, which is a clone of A, we pretty much just point to the same set of storage pages. So you can notice here, there's 4 storage pages in this document. Now, because we are pointing to the same storage spaces, we're not the time it takes to create a clone is not a function of how big or how much storage or how much storage or documents you have inside your original cluster. So we know that when you create a new cluster, a new instance, it takes about that 5 to 7 minute time range, which is where you're seeing the same amount of time to take to create a clone, because we are pointing to the same storage volume. Now, let's say at some point A decides to make a change on the first document, on document 1. What we would do is then at that point, we would create a new page with that changed, with an updated document. However, the clone database is still referring to 1, so we don't delete that 1 for now, right? And this kind of brings up to a second point. Because we use copy on write, you're not being billed for 2 sets of pages. So like not 1, 2, 3, 4 for A and then 1, 2, 3, 4 for B. You're only in this case being billed for these 5 pages. So only when there's an update or a change as instructed through either instance or cluster in this point, do you actually incur additional storage charges. And I think that's very powerful as well in another sense.
Yeah. And just a quick question then. So if I say like cluster A, they make another update to A, it's still only 5 copies. If I don't want to say 5 copies, but it's still just, there's a new version of 1A. We're not creating a 5th document there, right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. So similarly with B, let's say you decide to do a write or a read, inserting a new document. In this case, to document 4 or on page 4, the data, we would then copy and then write to it. So hence copy on write. And you can see that now it's 4B. Now 4 is not deleted either because it's still being referenced by A. So I think that over time, as you need to make a lot of changes, you'll start seeing this fragment more and more in that case. But if you're just doing just a few updates and a few writes where you need to clone temporarily, this is going to be a great use case for that.
Right. And like that use case you mentioned, maybe some one-off or infrequent, maybe complex sort of queries, you're not incurring any additional cost on the storage because you're reading, right?
Yeah.
Potentially in those cases.
If you're doing reads, then yeah, you're definitely not going to be incurring that much additional unless the source was also making a lot of updates. So either updates to either the source or the target, to your point, Doug, unless there's lots of updates, then you don't incur that much more storage.
Cool. Very nice.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to the console and show you how easy it is to actually create a clone. So here I am in my Amazon DocumentDB console under create. So here I have a list of clusters. What I'm going to do is not create a new cluster. I'm actually going to select this cluster called DocumentDB cluster. And this is a regional cluster. So I can go here under actions and click on create clone. And this is going to bring me to a page that's kind of similar to the create cluster page when you do create a new cluster and or instance. So I'm going to call this clone DB. And the next thing I can select is the instance class. So by default, when you create a clone cluster, we actually create just one instance. But however, you could add additional instances later on. So this case, I'm just going to leave it as R6G large. And I could change other subnet and network settings, such as subnet and VPC groups as well. In this case, I can also configure my encryption at rest settings, and I can also touch upon other settings here as well. I'm just going to go ahead and create this. So then at this point, this is going to take about, that 5-7 minutes. So why don't we go ahead and go to the next feature, and then we'll come back to see when this is done.
Cool. We'll let it bake a bit. All right.
Yeah. It's not like a baking show where I have this done already. All right. Let's go to our third feature. And this feature is a new data type. So decimal 128. Now, I think the best way, now we do have a what's new, as you can see here. However, it is a lot of text, for those who are very familiar with computer science or you're really ingrained in dealing with, different applications, you may be familiar with decimal 128. But I feel like the best way for me to showcase this feature is not actually through, the docs here, but really through a demo. So I am going to go to our Cloud9 shell. Let's clear this page. So for those who are not familiar joining us today, Cloud9 is a development environment that's built into the browser. So you don't have to set up your own dev environment, a client side. This is all built into the browser, accessible through the AWS console. So one thing, to show you a little bit about decimal 28, so let's talk about numbers. And I'm going to have I'm going to open my Python shell here, and I'm going to ask you a question, Doug. So I'm going to actually do this very simple statement. I'm going to do 0.1 plus 0.2. All right, Doug, what do you think the value of this is? Maybe you're laughing and you know the answer to this already.
It depends.
It depends. Okay, what do you think is going to be?
Well, I would expect it to be 0.3. Let's put it that way.
Okay. I would also expect it to be 0.3. But do you think it's going to be 0.3?
Based on what we're doing here, no.
Yeah, based on the way I'm asking this question, it's really like, oh, he's totally asking me a trick question. But you are correct. So you don't get 0.3. What's really happening here is when we look at numbers from a computer perspective, how computers store numbers is in binary. So that's base 2. And how humans, our number system and a lot of the ways we handle things in accounting and finance, science and engineering, a lot of times we deal with what we call base 10. So you have 10 numbers that represents the number spectrum, right? from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Computers, they only have one and zeros. So what that really means for us is in some cases, numbers can't be represented in its in a finite form. So similar for us, if you do 1 divided by 3, you know that it goes 0.3333333 into infinity. Now, at some point, you actually lose out on, if you try to represent it in numbers in a base 10 format, like you see here, you end up losing that last 3 because we kind of round it down, and that's actually a loss of significance or significant figures.
Right.
So you can see here the last, I mean, for us, in Python, looks like they rounded it off, right? And this is not a Python issue, like to call it out. Some folks, they see this demo like, oh no, Python's all screwed up. It's like, no, it's not. It's just the way we store numbers. And this is no different from most systems, right? So what's interesting for those who want to learn more, go to your, Python or any language, take this point, this 0.333, whatever, go to your browser, and I think you can go like .com. Yeah, so someone actually took this number. So for those who want to learn a little bit more on this, and this is important for those who are dealing with, I would say, that requires a lot of precision in your applications, right? So this is one of my new favorites. I found this website I found it really kind of funny. But anyways, going all the way back to decimal 128 and why this is kind of important. Now, decimal 128 uses 128 bits of bits to represent the number. So it has a lot of precision, of course. So let's go ahead and exit this. And I'm going to go back to my Mongo environment, using the Mongo shell to access my DocumentDB environment. So I'm going to just go to my database, show database. I'm going to use a database GameDB, and I want to show you a document with. So above here, the content I have above is just a clipboard for those who are watching and wondering if that's important. It's not. So here I want to show you 2 documents I have. They have an ID of A, and they have 2 numbers, 0.1 and 0.2. Now I'm going to do the same thing with what I did in Python. I'm going to add these 2 numbers. And I get the same value, right? And this is going to be the case in most languages, in most databases, if you are using it a double as the integer, the value type, right? Now, in some systems, they default to another type of a number type, right? By default, in this case, it's double. Now, so let's go ahead and insert 2 decimal 128 documents. So here, you can see here, I'm entering into my example collection. I'm going to insert a number. And the way I'm going to do this is use this number decimal function on the number itself, which indicates, hey, please store this value as a decimal 128 value. And here I have IDB. So let's go ahead and run the same query, the same aggregation query, where it's going to change this in my clipboard up above. And I'm going to just do a sum on the numbers. I'm going to do a sum where I'm matching on all the documents that have an ID of B, and I'm going to sum the numbers values. So same thing here. And you can see that this time it points 0.3. So this is a lot more precise. We have a lot more digits. And there's another importance here is not just the number of digits we use to represent this number. It's also that in decimal 128, we actually use decimal floating point precision. So you can read a lot more about how decimal 128, how it works using that website I showed you earlier. There's documents that links out to the IEEE standard, which we are implementing here as well.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, that's very cool. I know this is. I've been in technology for longer than I like to admit, and this is always a concern. Yeah, do you have enough precision to represent what you really need to? So yeah, this is awesome to see this support.
Yeah. So if you're using, I think that a lot of our customers have come to us asking for this this feature as well, the support for this, especially those in the finance and accounting, science and engineering realms where precision really matters. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, yep. All right, so that's decimal 128. Let's go to our last demo here, our last feature I'd like to call out, and it's DML Query Auditing. So, DocumentDB always did support auditing for quite a while now. However, we only supported data definition language. So changes to the structure, creation of collections. Those are examples of the definition of your data. But now we also support data manipulation language. So any events that manipulate your data, such as inserts, updates, reads, deletes, those are classified as DML type of events. If you're familiar with databases, there is a separation of these two for those who are joining us today. So what we could do is now audit these type of events. Now, if you're building your Hello World app, you may not be concerned about this, but there are some really legitimate use cases on why you might want to use this.
Cool. Yeah, I know. Yeah, certainly going back to like decimal 128, certain industries and things like that. Same here. Heavily audited types of industries, right? They need to know exactly who's doing what, right?
Yeah.
Down to each query level. So this is going to allow them to be able to audit all of that now.
Yeah, so if you go to our documentation, you'll see all the types of events. Some of them I listed before, and some you saw in that What's New post. Now you'll see all the events that we do support. So you see here, What's New is in the bottom here. There are some DML categories that you'll see types of events. So like I was mentioning, inserts, deletes, updates, those sort of things. I won't go through all of them here today, but you can see what that looks like and what is supported. So I want to go back to our environment. Oh, by the way, we see that the instance is still kind of spinning up. Maybe I should just refresh this page. Okay, still creating, still configuring. This is our clone database, clone cluster from that first demo that we had. But let's go ahead and take a look at our DocDB cluster. So if you want to enable DMO auditing or auditing in general, the first thing you would do is to go to your cluster and look and go under configuration. And what you'll see is check on that cluster parameter group. So in this case, I have it called custom cluster param. And this corresponds to the parameter group that's used, that you can access on the left side. So you can go under parameter groups. And these have a set of parameters that you can apply to multiple clusters. And what I have is, you'll see that there's the first one here on this page is audit logs. So click on audit logs. And to enable DML auditing or any type of auditing, you would edit this value. Now, what you could choose are all these values here. So you could look at just DDL. So you could have the choice of just editing DDL types of events. You could look at DML read types of events, DML write types of events. You could look at all events or no events. Before, we had just enabled, disabled. So this didn't provide you the type of granularity of looking at what type of events, but now we support some additional values as well.
Okay.
And
sorry, on that event, I thought I'd seen somewhere, we recommend folks to move away from enabled and disabled. If they want disabled, use none, right? And for enabled, use the appropriate, do you want the DDL? Do you want the read? Do you want the write? Do you want all?
Yes, you're right on that, Doug. Yeah, so I would say these two are legacy values. Before, we just had a binary value of, do you want it on or do you want it off? And now, if you want it on, specify any value, and if you want it off, specify none. What's interesting, one thing I like to call out here in the very top is when you're modifying your parameter groups, you'll see in the very top as well, this edit to this audit logs will impact CloneDB and the original DocDB cluster. So this CloneDB is a new one. And I already had it enabled to all, so I'm looking at all events. So that's how you enable it. Now, just going back a little bit, What this really means, again, if you want to learn a little bit more about what's on this page, you could take a look at what these values mean. So you can see here. Yep. So let's go into our next demo environment around DML as well. So I already have this enabled. Now, where do these logs go? Right.
So sorry, one other question real quick, Vin. Do I need to do anything else to the cluster itself, right? I've got that enabled in the parameter group. And I know when you were creating the clone earlier, you had the checkboxes to enable, the profiler logs and audit logs.
Right, good point. Yes. So one thing I might have missed out here, and I think I showed it in clone when we were creating the clone database, but let's go here and click on modify. Actually, one thing that you also need to go do is enable these logs actually. So there's two parts to this. Totally great point here, Doug. One of them is to enable the configuration to actually start producing the actual audit logs. The other one's to actually publish these logs to CloudWatch. All right, so you can go to under modify and you'll see that under log exports that this is allowed. Totally good point here, Doug.
Yeah, no problem. No, it's just I've had some questions about that from customers sometimes. So it is it's easy to overlook, but it is an important distinction there, like you described. Where one is just you're telling the engine to start logging these things, but the other is to now actually publish those logs.
Yep, and we actually explicitly ask you we really have this option here, and I think one of the reasons is security, right? Like just to make sure that you are really allowing the system to export these logs into another system, which is CloudWatch in this case.
All right.
So with that said, on the point of CloudWatch, let's actually go to a CloudWatch environment where our logs are going to be exported to. And I'm going to click on log groups. And one of the log groups you'll see is this this DocDB cluster. And you also see one for clone database as well. This is for our clone. But because we also create a clone of it, all those parameters are also being applied in this case. But let's take a look at this DocDB cluster, which is what we've been using all along. And I'm going to click on search. Now, there's a lot of events here across. It's just constantly flowing in because I have this enabled. One thing I'm going to do is just click on the last 30 minutes worth of events. Then you still see a lot of ongoing events I have targeting this cluster. But I'm going to actually click on find as the event I want to go take a look at. And remember before we were in this Cloud 9 environment, we were actually doing a find on the documents that we had for that decimal 128 demo. So point 1 and point 2, we were really just looking for all the documents that had an ID of A. Now because I had auditing already enabled, I should be able to see that here. So I do have one event, and I see that it's actually present here. So in the last 30 minutes when we did this demo, you'll see that the details here of that actual audit event. So you can see that the user I logged in was myself, Vin. The database that I was connected to and that was audited was GameDB. The database that I was targeting is example, and the filter that I was applying for in my find query was actually looking for ID of A. And the command that I was issuing was find. So you can see all the details here on this page, and some additional, more advanced parameters as well.
Nice.
Yeah. Now, the benefit of really having this in CloudWatch is not just, you being able to search, using this very powerful search log capability, but it's also to do as an integration hook towards other things as well. So you can look at metric filters. And what metric filters is going to do is, based on a filter pattern, you could insert a metric value. So if you're familiar with metrics on CloudWatch, we pretty much have a lot of metrics to track many different, lack of a better word, metrics on your database. But every time you can also create customized metrics as well. So in this case, what I did was every time there is a find in my logs and it's targeting and it sees this namespace of the game DB database with a collection of example, what I'm going to do is enter a metric of 1, right? And why would you want to do this? Now, one thing that you could do is actually create an alarm on that. So in fact, I already do have an alarm on this. So let's go ahead and take a look at my CloudWatch alarms. So you can see that currently I'm in an in-alarm state. And so every time I have an audit event where I have a find event on this example collection in this database, I'm going to insert one value. So you can see here that this is currently in an alarm state, and it's on the very right here is the time of the most recent time, and I can see that it is in this alarm state. So you can see that there was that one time I did a find, I think just a few minutes ago.
Got it. Yeah, that's really cool. And then obviously you can. This is a very powerful capability with filtering, right? It's you could even filter on maybe certain values in those parameters just to, if it's some very sensitive data and you want to audit every time maybe somebody is changing it to a certain value, you could easily do that as well here within CloudWatch.
Yeah. So you can see here there are some use cases. For example, let's say, we were, a lot of times, whether you're an engineer or you're in DevOps or operations, you may have access to the production database, and for good reason as well, because you may be doing there to perform fixes, to perform other operations like taking backups, doing other aspects in the database where there are numerous number of tasks and reasons why you might need access to a production database. However, you shouldn't be potentially looking at all the data, right? So you can look at there may be some very sensitive data, or you need to have an audit log. And with so many different, imagine you had tens of hundreds of databases. As an administrator, especially a security administrator, how are you going to have ability to manually monitor all of that, right? So this is where something like DML auditing is going to really help you enforce those and make sure you have an audit trail, literally, to track these type of events.
This is awesome. Thanks for sharing this here, Dan.
Yeah. And the last thing I want to share with you, everything, that whole demo with DMO auditing is fully accessible through a blog that we published just last Friday on August the 12th, right? Whoops. So you can see here everything that I've shown you on the reasons why you might want to use DML auditing, from compliance to enhancing your security posture to really enabling DML end to end. We have this blog where we walk you through how you enable it, how you configure, how you access these records in CloudWatch, how you can create metric filters, how you create an alarm, and how you can validate this alarm by inserting data and doing a delete. So everything here is in this one blog. So everything I showed you.
Yeah, I've actually gone through the blog myself, and you're right, Finn. It's this will, in a short time, get you up and running with everything you need to know about DML auditing and seeing it in action. So yeah, this is a great resource. Thanks for sharing this.
Yeah, great. I wish I had more to share. I mean, I think that we already had shared 4 features with everybody who are joining us today.
Can we check on our clone, see if it's cloned?
Yeah, most definitely. I think it's done. So if I go back to our DocumentDB page, you can see that it's fully created. Yep. Nice. So I think so I think it's been 15 minutes since my DML demo. So you can see that's fully done. And I can actually go ahead and, at this point, you really just treat it like it's its own separate new cluster here. Mm-hmm. And all of the configurations, this is actually inherited from the original source. So, for example, it uses the same cluster parameter group. It has the CloudWatch logs enabled, right, in this case.
And presumably I can go and change any of these now since it is its own standalone cluster.
Yeah. So I can go ahead and click this modify, and let's say I want to turn off auditing on this because it's just a clone. I'm using it for dev purposes. I don't really care. Actually, maybe I want profile logs just for, editing this instance. I can just, press continue, and this is going to be, and I can put apply now even, and I can modify this cluster.
Got it. So what happens if I delete the original one? How does that affect the clone?
So because the clone is still referring to that same set of data, that storage data is still going to be around, right? So back to the original diagram of, who's referencing this set of pages. If any one of these instances are referring to the set of pages, those set of pages remain and stick around.
Got it. Okay, cool. So I can delete the original clone, still has all of the access to all the data.
Yeah. So in fact, we still have, that is exactly that question here.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Delete that source cluster volume, right? I mean, cluster volume. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. That is really awesome feature there. I personally like that one a lot myself. So I've been using it quite a bit. All right. Well, thanks, Vin. Been keeping an eye on the chat. Didn't see any questions coming through on chat. Always a pleasure to have you on here. And just before we wrap up, I do want to give folks maybe a few minutes or a few moments to scan this QR code or copy down the URL. And this is going to take you to the Amazon DocumentDB resources page. And you're going to have access to things like the documentation, links to the developer guide, like Vin was showing you some content from the developer guide there, best practices information, links to different tools that we have to help you, especially with things like migrations to DocumentDB, links to the blogs, and even links to past DocumentDB Insider Hour episodes. Geez, can't talk. So, strongly encourage you to take a look at that. Go ahead, bookmark that, because that's going to be a good centralized resource of anything DocumentDB. All right. Well, with that, I think it's a wrap for today, Vin. Again, appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you all again soon.
Yep. See you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.